Hi philosophizers! I'm excited to share with you the second video in Philosophizes' Safe Space series. Today I'm promising 5 insights into the safe space phenomenon, and I'm confident that at least one of them will represent a thought or angle you've not heard before. In last week's video, I outlined the general thesis of an article I'm writing entitled The Animus of Safe Spaces, Coddling or Censorship. I argued that safe spaces are not motivated by hurt feelings, but by bad ideas. If you haven't watched that video yet, it might provide helpful context for what we'll be covering today. As it turns out, I'm still writing the article I referenced in that video, so I'll continue sharing insights as I work to bring it to completion. I want to begin with a few preliminary points, and then a relevant video clip of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson answering a question from a student about safe spaces. I'm assuming recognition of the fact that safe spaces are part of a wider movement overtaking college campuses, and that this movement sees some of the same students who participate in safe spaces making impertinent demands of school administrators and convening in disruptive classroom sit-ins, shouting match protests, and even violent mobs. I'm also operating on the premise that all of these activities serve the same basic goals, and we'll explore those goals together today. Finally, I'm operating on the premise that these goals are motivated by the students' ideas about the world, by their ideology, and not primarily by their hurt feelings. Okay, so now I would like to play the video of Dr. Jordan B. Peterson answering a student's question about safe spaces, and I'll respond.
And then the safe space issue. It's like if you need a safe space, see a therapist. Really. University is not a safe space. If university is done right, it is a radically unsafe space. If you want to go somewhere and get yourself taken apart intellectually and then hopefully put back together, then you go to university. Everything you believe should be challenged in every possible way, but not in a destructive sense, right? Like when you're renovating a house, you don't just burn it to the ground and walk away. That's what the postmodernists do to adolescence, by the way. You dismantle it in consultation with its occupant, attempting to build something more beautiful and functional on the foundation. It's not.
Okay. So there's something very right about this response. Universities serve a purpose, and it is wrong to the point of absurdity to treat institutions of higher learning as places of guerrilla activism on the grounds that you have nothing new to learn, that a college campus is just a platform for advocating your preconceived notions, that learning consists merely in justifying your ideas, not in developing them, which necessarily includes challenging them. So, Dr. Jordan B. Peterson's response serves the purpose of reaching students who might find themselves standing at the threshold of the safe space movement. It does them the service of granting them permission to turn around and walk the other way, to pursue the proper course of a college education as he has laid it out. It gives them permission not to take seriously the false righteousness of a movement that inverts the meaning and purpose of education. But what I don't think it does is offer us any insight into how we can change the conditions that give rise to the safe space movement. And that's not a criticism of Dr. Peterson's response. He's said plenty more about safe spaces elsewhere, and there's no need to cover every aspect of an issue when answering a question. I only mean to suggest that if we're trying to understand the why behind safe spaces, it is less helpful to focus on students' psychologies or feelings, for example, by prescribing therapy sessions or calling them crybabies, which is a common criticism I mentioned in the last video, than it is to focus on their intellects and ideas. That said, when I was contemplating why students participate in safe spaces, I struggled with the question of whether they actually feel unsafe when confronted with speakers whose ideas oppose their own. I hadn't realized at first that there was one sense in which I thought the answer was yes, and another sense in which I thought the answer was no, and that resolving this tension would yield unique insight into the intellectual nature of the safe space phenomenon. So I'd like to share my thought process with you and then at the end offer 5 key insights or takeaways. Consider this paragraph from an early draft of my article on safe spaces, where I explain one of the functions that I think safe spaces serve. It goes like this. Consider that some individuals, if they saw hordes of people running from a man who had been walking down the street, would describe the event in as many words. But others, especially those who felt fearful in the frenzy, would recall the event as one in which a man was chasing people. This is what safe spacers count on, that a walker should be perceived as a chaser by virtue of other people's running, that an invitation to listen, which can be accepted or rejected, should be perceived as a threat, that some ideas, expressed in speech, should be perceived as fists, and, therefore, that those ideas must be forbidden, cast as thought crimes and countered, not with the force of persuasion, but with chanting, brutishness, and the compulsory powers of school administrators. Now, in my article, I'll need to substantiate the last part of this description, that safe spacers ultimately use force against those they disagree with and that they think it's both proper and necessary to do so. But what I want to bring your attention to now is that this explanation focuses on the way safe spaces cast suspicion on speakers, how they delegitimize speakers. My explanation stresses the fact that running away broadcasts a warning to other students who might have been interested in attending a given speaker's talk, that the speaker is perpetrating something with his ideas, and therefore should not be listened to. And this idea that the speaker is a perpetrator is something that they genuinely believe. But what caught me by surprise was the fact that my explanation contained no mention of the stated function of safe spaces, to make the students inside of them feel safe. And when I thought about this, I realized that none of my observations, none of what I've seen or heard or read, suggests that they're afraid of speakers in any traditional sense of the word. Certainly they feel something, but it didn't seem like fear was an accurate or at least not a complete description. Which is strange, because fear would be a natural response to someone that you perceive as a perpetrator. To solve this mystery, I had to understand a couple of things. First, what they think the speaker is perpetrating and how they think he's perpetrating it. And second, what goals they are pursuing. Safe spacers aren't just reactionaries. They're not just casually walking down the street when an idea hits their skull or their chest like a brick, sending them running. If they're walking down the street, it's in a very deliberate direction. They're pursuing a vision, and the speaker's ideas upset them because they contradict and subvert that vision. Consider the kinds of ideas that send students running to safe spaces. They are individualistic, capitalistic, and of the Enlightenment era. Specifically, the ideas they find intolerable emphasize a specific vision of 3 things: what a single human being is capable of achieving, how he achieves them, and the conditions necessary for him to achieve them. On the first question, their opponents believe that individuals can achieve objective knowledge and mastery of reality, a noble purpose, and a happy, self-sufficient life. On the second question, their opponents believe that individuals can achieve these things through the independent exercise of their mind, through hard work, through the transformation of nature, and through voluntary association with others. On the third question, their opponents believe that individuals require freedom, a government that protects their right to place their mind in the service of their life and to be the beneficiary of their own thought, choices, and actions. These ideas are anathema to the safe spacer, who seeks a world shaped by opposite values. A collectivist world, a socialist world, an environmentalist world. That's their goal. As they see it, any focus on the individual is just the white man's attempt to defraud minority groups of their identity and power, a means to divide and conquer them. Any claim to objective knowledge of reality is just the Westerner's attempt to impose his values on others. Who is he to have a monopoly on what counts as truth? Any purpose he pursues cannot be noble if it does not serve his brothers and sisters. Any claim to self-sufficiency only serves to deny the debt he owes others, a debt which society must enforce on him. Any emphasis on reason only serves to disenfranchise those whose feelings run counter to what is traditionally known as fact. Any emphasis on hard work only serves to perpetuate oppression by deceiving the downtrodden into thinking that their lot in life is the result of insufficient effort or grit, not the system of oppression they were born into. And this, according to my classmate at Columbia, keeps them docile and laboring so the white man can keep profiting on their backs. Any glorification of transforming nature only feeds the white man's hubris, his destructive hubris. Who is he to play God with Mother Nature? Any emphasis on voluntary association is just the white man's way of justifying bigotry and discrimination. Any emphasis on freedom or individual rights is just the white man's way of ensuring his worst impulses go unchecked. What you'll notice here is that the safe spacer, if I've described their worldview accurately, doesn't acknowledge any possible argument for their opposition's ideas. Rather, they assign motivations to these ideas. Motivations which they believe center on the desire to maintain control, power, dominance. Their goal is to destroy the systems of oppression they see themselves as the victims of. It is not just that they think their opponent's ideas are wrong. It is not just that they think their ideas would be oppressive if put into practice. If that were the case, they could simply argue against these ideas to persuade others and prevent them from being adopted. The issue is that they don't believe any argument is possible, or more accurately, that any honest disagreement is possible. As they see it, their worldview is obvious and incontrovertible. All you have to do is open your eyes to see the interconnected systems of oppression in which all people who are not cisgender, heterosexual white men are trapped. Argumentation can serve only one purpose in their eyes. Not to convince, but to confuse, distract, trick, and deceive people away from the obvious, self-evident truth. They acknowledge no argument for, and they offer no argument against. This is why they retreat into safe spaces, to avoid argument. What they fear for is not the imminent safety of themselves, of their person, but the fate of their worldview. They fear their vision will never be realized, that their power struggle will never be won if they are made to fight with arguments. Why? Because their worldview is obviously true, their vision is incontrovertibly good, and anybody who needs convincing, therefore, must be in denial or inherently dishonest, and therefore beyond convincing. Theirs is the non-ironically stated position that if you have to ask me why I believe this, there's no way you can understand the explanation. They don't fear the opposition, I realized, so much as they hate the opposition. This explains their willingness to aggress against them. What they actually seek protection from is not their opponents per se, but from the school administrator, for example, who would respond to their demands to disinvite the speaker, or to cancel his event, or to implement a policy that penalizes the expression of his ideas. Not with acquiescence, but with the suggestion that they host a debate or write a critical op-ed instead. As if an honest argument were possible between lions and lambs, or between liars and truth-tellers, the safe spacers snap. When the safe spacer declares that encouraging discourse, dialogue, or debate is tantamount to asking a victim, themselves, to confront a perpetrator, the speaker, they disarm the school administrator. If the student's complaint isn't a matter of disagreement, but of safety, what are they to do? They are responsible for the well-being of their students, after all. So they disinvite the speaker, cancel the event, or implement the policy. Now, should the school administrator buy in so quickly to this conflation of speech and violence? No. Do they actually help the student by doing this? No, but that's a discussion for another time. Next week, we'll take up the question of how it is these students developed their worldview in the first place, and how they came to believe that their ideas are self-evident and in need of no defense. But the perspective we've covered so far can be summarized with these 5 takeaways. First, safe spacers are ideologues of the left. Theirs is a collectivistic, socialistic, environmentalist worldview, which entails identity politics, systemic oppression, and power struggle. Second, safe spaces serve 2 purposes: to cast suspicion on speakers by suggesting they perpetrate crimes with ideas that function like force, and to protect students from having to argue for their ideas and against the oppositions. Third, safe spacers avoid argument because they consider their worldview to be self-evident and incontrovertible. They believe only the dishonest could disagree with them and only deniers could need convincing. They think arguments function like trickery or weapons that distract people from seeing the obvious truth. Fourth, safe spacers don't evaluate ideas in terms of the arguments for or against them. Instead, they assign motivations to them. The motivations they assign to their opposition include defrauding, disenfranchising, and oppressing, all of which serve to maintain their position of power. Fifth, safe spacers hate their opposition. What they fear is having to argue for their ideas. By declaring that they feel unsafe, safe spacers disarm those who would encourage discourse rather than censorship on the basis of mere disagreement. By conflating speech with violence, they secure protection at the cost of freedom. And what they seek to secure is not the integrity of their person, but the dominance of their worldview. Okay. I hope this video has given you some valuable insights into the animus of safe spaces. If it has, please go ahead and give it a like. And if you think others might value our perspective, give it a share. If you'd like to make sure that you're notified when our next video is published, there are a few steps you can take. You can subscribe to us on YouTube and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/philosophize-inc. You can also learn more about Philosophize the company and how we're working to advance the intellectual independence of high school and college students at philosophizeinc.com. Finally, go ahead and leave a comment or question below. I would love to hear from you, and I'd especially love to know, was there anything in this video that shifted your thinking on the safe space phenomenon or that significantly contributed to it? Until next time, I hope you are well, and I will see you next week.